Thank you, Phil. Hey, everybody. I'm Shannon. I'm an alcoholic. Um, yeah. So, yeah, back to Zoom, right? So, I had gone back to in-person meetings now, so kind of getting back to the Zoom feeling it once more. So, uh, but yeah, it's. Thank you so much, Phil, for asking me to speak tonight, and I think when I spoke, or when I agreed to this, I didn't realize there was going to be so many people on, but that's okay. um, I'll just do my best to stay out of the way and let God go ahead and use me as a channel this evening. Um, so yeah, I'm Shannon. I'm an alcoholic. I have a sobriety date of April 21st of 2002. I have a home group, the Page 112 group. We meet in Old Hickory, Tennessee on Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. You guys are all welcome to attend if you're ever in town. It's a suburb of Nashville, so not too far outside of the city limits, but and I have a sponsor who has a sponsor, and I have other women that I sponsor, and I'm involved in general service, which I love so much, and I hope to talk about at some point as well this evening. And I say all those things mainly because that's in a nutshell, right? Like that's how I maintain my sobriety, right? And so yeah, that's why I say those things. So I'll tell you a little bit about what it was like. Essentially, I grew up in Nashville. I didn't really make it far in my life, but born and raised in the same city my whole life for most of it, and grew up in a very Catholic, very Irish, and very alcoholic family, and where drinking just like wasn't a big deal, right? Like it just wasn't a big deal, and I knew from one of the earliest ages that like I really just wanted to drink. I wasn't sure why I ever felt like that. But one of my earliest memories, right? I was 3 or 4 years old. My dad was on the grill for a neighborhood barbecue that we were doing, right? Because we like to one of these old ideas that I had was that, as long as everything looks okay on the outside, then everything was fine and we didn't have to talk about anything, right? So we would have these like gatherings where we were social and we looked like a normal family, right? And I'm not really sure what normal looks like, but I'm not sure that we were it. But he was like flipping burgers on the barbecue, and my younger sister and I went up to him and we smiled real big and looked real cute and took the beer right out of his hand and ran around the house and drank it, right? And by the time we were finished, it's the only time I think that I ever voluntarily shared any alcohol. But when by the time we were finished drinking that, we went back over to my dad. He had already opened up another bottle of beer, another can of beer. And so took that out of his hand, smiled real cute. He thought it was cute, let us have it, so forth and so forth. And like, that's just how my drinking was growing up, right? Like it wasn't that big of a deal as long as everything was looking okay on the outside, right? So I went to Catholic schools growing up, very strict, and they did not go along really with my alcoholic mentality later on. But went to schools, always kind of felt throughout school that I was just different than other people, right? I hear a lot of people talk about that in the rooms, and when I did my one of my first inventories, I had a sponsor that talked about going through and looking at the people that made that first column, right? That were lucky enough to make it my inventory. And she asked me if anyone on that list, right, in that first column, if I felt like I was better than or less than, or if I was same to any of them, right? And what I can tell you was that during that process, I was not same to anybody on that list, right? I was either, I thought my perception, right, was either that I was better than or less than. Most of the time it was less than. I always felt inferior. I always felt like I had a chip on my shoulder. I had something to prove. I'm the middle child of three girls, and always was always the shortest one, which if you meet me in person, you'd be like, oh, that tracks. I'm like maybe 5 feet tall. So, always had something to prove, regardless of what it was. And I just was paralyzed by fear, right? I had to be right all the time. I was unable to admit that I was wrong at any time. And that's how I lived my life, right? Like, and I'm talking like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, right? Like that's how I lived my life. My parents also ended up getting divorced, so you're going to hear more about my mom than my dad, but that has absolutely no reason why I'm an alcoholic. But I remember the first time I remember getting like good and drunk, right? Like that experience, right, that we talk about in here. I was about 11 years old, and my older sister was about to go off to high school, right? And my mom had been drinking, and my older sister had some friends over. She had convinced my mom that they needed to get good and drunk before high school. They needed to have that experience, right? I mean, that's just what you do in high school. And so my mom was like, yeah, absolutely. Totally. Right. And so she went to the liquor store and got all these mixes for pina coladas. And I remember that one of my sister's friends slid the drink my way. And I hate coconut, but I will absolutely drink something if you slide it my way. And so I remember drinking it, and I remember that spiritual experience that happened, right? Because here's the thing, for me, alcohol did so much for me. It did, right? Until it like tried to kill me. But like for a while, it did so much for me. It took that chip off my shoulder, those fears that I lived in, right? That I was paralyzed with. All of those went away. All of those went away, and in just a moment, right? It was truly a spiritual experience. My thought plane was on a very different level at that point. You know what I mean? Like it was a wonderful experience. And the beautiful thing in that was that I was same with all of those people in the room, right? I was same. I didn't have to try to be somebody else. I didn't have to be this, that, or the other, right? But I was like on the same level with everybody. And that was not an experience that I was used to feeling. Very foreign for me. So I pretty much after that night, I blacked out, woke up the next morning, and, was best friends with essentially all of my older sister's friends, which really just annoyed my older sister. But, really felt like I had found the solution to life, which was like pretty amazing because I was like 11. So, but I was like, I have found the solution. I've got it. Right. And so from that point moving forward, I knew that I wanted to get drunk as often as I possibly could. Our house became kind of the party house, right? Where my older sister's friends would come and they would drink, and they would think it was adorable to get the little sister drunk. And I was also very excited about that as well. And so, that's kind of how things progressed. I didn't really have any consequences at that point. It was still really fun. But I did know that when I went to school, like 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and like people were asking about my weekends, like I knew that I couldn't really tell them that I had been drinking, right? Because like I knew that wasn't, like deep down, I knew that wasn't probably normal for most people, right? Like normal 6th, 7th, and 8th graders don't drink every weekend. Okay. They'll get there, right? So it didn't really have many consequences. In high school, I had played soccer throughout my childhood, right? That was my sport, and I played on different travel teams, yada yada yada. I made the varsity team my freshman year in high school, and I thought, and I started, right? Like I played. And so I told myself, I'm not gonna like kind of jeopardize this opportunity, right? I'm gonna not drink, and I'm not gonna do anything else for the entirety of the soccer season, right? So that's the pact that I made with myself. And I made it those few months, right? Our team ended up making it to the state championship. I was down in Chattanooga, which is a couple hours away from where I live now. And I vividly recall when we got knocked out of the tournament, we went back to our hotel room that night. I remembered that pact. The first thing I did when we went back to the hotel room was I walked across the street to the Walgreens and was begging people to buy me alcohol. Right. And I stood outside that Walgreens for God knows how long. Right. But I asked a lot of people. A lot of people said no, but there was one kind gentleman, looking back, low-key, probably creepy, but ended up buying me booze, right? And got my 6-pack, and I went back over to my hotel room and I drank it by myself, right? Like that's how the rest of my freshman year went. I will say our house continued to be the party house until around Christmas time. And what happened around Christmas time was that my mom decided that she was an alcoholic and that she needed to stop drinking. And to kind of back up a little bit, AA and my family, like we have a long history. Okay. So my grandfather died with 33 years of sobriety. My uncle had about 16 years sober at one time, and my other uncle committed suicide because he couldn't get sober, right? And so I knew about AA growing up. Like I kind of knew about it. I thought I knew about it, right? I thought I was an expert at a lot of things. Let's get serious. So so my mom decided she needed to go to AA, and so she started going to AA, and I would love to tell you that I was super supportive of that. I was not, mainly because it affected my drinking, right? It affected my drinking. And she picked me up from school one day, and we were going a different way home, kind of the opposite direction, and realized we pulled into this parking spot in front of this building, and I was like, Mom, what are we doing here? Like, what are we doing? And she said, you're going to go in here and you're going to talk to this gentleman, and you're going to tell him about your drinking, and we're going to determine what we do from here. She said, you're going to have a little assessment, right? So I did what every good alcoholic does who's not ready to get sober, not ready to go to rehab, was I started bawling, crying in front of this counselor, lied about my drinking extensively, right? Had the big, like, ugly tears with the snot, like the whole thing, right? The whole thing that we do. He still recommended that I do outpatient treatment, and I was shocked and appalled, right? So I was like, I don't think you understand. So I went through that outpatient treatment, not with no intention of staying sober whatsoever. But I did learn that I was an alcoholic. I did learn that, right? I knew that my drinking was not like my peers, right? Like I knew that. But my life wasn't unmanageable. So I thought, right? My mom would disagree, but so I went through that program, and I knew I was an alcoholic. I knew I had a problem, but not interested in doing anything about it. I continued to drink. And the next soccer season rolled around, and I made that same pact with myself of I'm not going to smoke, and I'm not going to drink and anything else, right? For that, those few months that I was going to play on the varsity team. The problem was that in just one short year, I wasn't able to make it longer than a week, right? Like I knew at that point that I wasn't able to control or enjoy it, even though I had this self-knowledge, right? I'd been to a few AA meetings. Mom had started talking a different language when she went to AA, right? I knew that, I knew what I was. I just didn't realize that perhaps I was actually unmanageable, right? So I made it about a week, and I lied to myself when I drank, and I just said, it's not that big of a deal. It doesn't make that big of a difference, yada, 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 right? Those things that we say to ourselves. Yeah, so, and my drinking progressed, right? And about this time I started, not just saying like the foxhole prayers, right? But I started also, I was just so spiritually depressed, right? Is the best descriptor that I can come up with it. I was so spiritually depressed that I would say this prayer that I feel like I only hear in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Which is God, just take me now, right? Like I can't continue on like this. That boy whistling in the dark, I would later learn to kind of find out about, right? I knew that I wasn't going to live through, like I wasn't going to graduate high school. I knew I was going to die before then. And I knew that, and I was kind of okay with it, right? Like I knew that something was going to happen, and that was that I was not going to survive high school. So, I started saying this prayer pretty frequently. Tried going to AA for my mom for a little bit to get her off my back, because she was off. I was also like coming home, and there would be like, all these pamphlets and brochures and like VHS tapes of like places I could go spend like the rest of my life, which, at like 14 years old was forever, right? So 14, 15 years old was like forever until you were 18. So, and they would, that's what I was coming home to pretty regularly. I disagreed wholeheartedly, despite also on this other hand, realizing that I was not a productive member of society, to say the very least, right? So as my drinking progressed, things just got really, really bad, right? Spiritually, I didn't have these material things to lose. I was 15 at the time, right? And so I didn't have a car, I didn't have a house, none of those things to lose. I mean, I lost relationships, but like, yeah, okay. I mean, I'm 15, like, calm down, right? But I hit bottom on my last drink was on April 20th of 2002. I was 15 when I got sober, and I woke up the morning of April 21st, and my mom was, I woke up to her screaming at me. I'd passed out in the living room the night before, and she was screaming at me because I had left out some, paraphernalia and party favors and whatnot. And my younger sister could see it. And so, she was a little upset about that. My cousin had spent the night before, and my mom had sent my cousin home. She sent her upstairs to get her all of her stuff, and then sent her home. And after my mom was finished, talking with me, I went up to my room. And I don't know if you drank like me, but I had multiple stashes throughout my room, right? So if like one bottle was confiscated, it was okay because I had like 18 others, right? They were just like kind of scattered throughout, because you have to be a planner, right? When you're like full-blown 15-year-old alcoholic, you got to be a planner. So so that's what I was going through my room looking for all of my different stashes, and they were all gone. My cousin had taken all of them, right? And at that moment, I realized that like I just wanted to die. I just wanted to die, right? Like that was the only way that I could see out of this predicament, of not having anything. And there was a knife on my bedstand, and I thought that was a sign from God. I picked it up, held it to my wrist, and I just prayed that God would give me the courage, right? That God would give me the courage to take my life. And I don't know how long I was sitting there, but I know that my mom walked in the room, and she saw what was going on, and she took the knife from my hand, and she asked if I was ready to get some help, and I said yeah. And so she called one of her good friends from AA, right? Her name was Marianne, and Marianne would come over every Christmas in her pajamas and her full-length mink coat. She could also say shit in 4 syllables, which was very impressive to me. And she came over and she 12-stepped me, right? And she talked to me about what Alcoholics Anonymous was. And she talked to me about perhaps going to a treatment center. And so she helped me get into treatment. And the day after I got sober, one of my friends that I partied with ended up passing away in a car accident on her way home. And so, went to her funeral, and straight from her funeral, I went to my 30-day stint in inpatient rehab, right? And I was honest about my drinking. And that was the first time I think that I had ever really been honest about my drinking at that point, even to myself, right? And so I would love to tell you that in that program, I became rigorously honest and was willing to do anything that anybody threw at me. And I was like the poster child for how to be sober. That was not necessarily my experience, but my hat's off to you if that was yours, right? I was still very spiteful and angry and all of those things, right? And I remember, who I am without the solution of Alcoholics Anonymous is my mom comes to visit me for Mother's Day, right? Her daughter who's in rehab on Mother's Day, right? How every mother wants to spend her Mother's Day. And we get into an argument about something, and I told her I didn't want to see her. I had nothing to say to her, and that she could just leave. But if she could leave the cigarettes that she brought me, that'd be great, right? Like, that's who I am with untreated alcoholism. And I can laugh and joke about that, but at the end of the day, it's really just embarrassing, right? Like, it's just embarrassing. That's not the person that I want to be in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous today, right? So she leaves on Mother's Day. She's in tears. And my counselor comes up and starts talking to me, and she asks if I've thought any more about a halfway house. And I was like, I don't know what that is. You keep talking about that. Like I'm supposed to know this and I don't know this, right? Like, what is this? And she tells me about a halfway house, and she tells me, I basically just ask her, like, so what you're telling me is that I don't have to go home after I go here. I can live somewhere else. And she said, yes. And I said, tell me more. And I would love to tell you is because I had all this spiritual motivation to do the right thing. And in reality, it was because I was still pissed at my mom. And I knew that would hurt her if I didn't come right back home. Right. Super spiteful. So again, whatever gets you there, I'm here for that. Right. But so she starts telling me about these two adolescent halfway houses. They were both in Louisiana at the time. Those were the closest ones. And she told me a lot about both of them. What I heard was that you could smoke in this one and you couldn't in this one. And I said, I'm going to take the one that I can smoke in, please. So I went down to a small town in Louisiana called Denham Springs, Louisiana. In 2002, so pre-Katrina. So it was like not even on any map at that point, right? It wasn't until post-Katrina that you started seeing it on maps because the population grew. So so I went down to this small town called Denham Springs. We pulled onto the street. The street's called 4-H Club Road. I am very much a city person, and I am very much not in a city at this point, right? And we go, one of the first meetings that I go to, I was at this clubhouse, and we're all sitting outside smoking, and there's a whole bunch of people there, and there's picnic tables and, yada, yada, yada. And I see this guy, and he's holding a leash, and I'm like, oh, I bet he's got a dog, right? Like, I'm going to go pet the dog because I love dogs. And I go around the picnic table to pet this dog, and realize really quickly that it's not actually a dog that he brought. It was his pet raccoon on a leash, right? That he brought to the AA meeting. And so that's where I got sober. And I say that because it's funny, but also because these people were very different than me, right? These individuals were very different than anything that I had even fathomed. But here's the thing. We had so many similarities. We drank the exact same. We had the same feelings when we were drinking, right? And that's where I learned to get sober. They started talking a lot about a sponsor. And I asked one of the workers at the halfway house what a sponsor was. And she told me, and I love that this is what she told me. Her response was, you're going to need to find someone that you're going to have a hard time lying to. And I knew exactly who I was going to pick as soon as she said that, right? There was this chick that came to our home group meetings. She was a biker chick. She had this big leather jacket with all these pins and patches and fringe, and like always wore these big boots, and she had short hair, and she smoked like a freight train, and her name was Cricket, and she scared the hell out of me, right? And so I knew that's who I was going to pick. And so I asked Cricket to be my sponsor, and she said yes. And she sat down and she went through the book with me. She translated that book for me line by line, right? Because I thought I knew what it meant. I thought that I knew a lot of lots of things when I got here. I knew very little, right? And she was able to explain line by line what was meant, because the whole point of the book, right, was that I'd change my life to be of maximum service to everybody else. And the book tells me how to do that. Right. And so if I'm not understanding what's in the book, it's going to be very difficult for me to have this psychic change, this spiritual experience in a way that's going to stick. Um, Now, Cricket was also a Spitfire, right? She told me very quickly that she was way more concerned about saving my life than about hurting my feelings. And she was very, very clear about that. And that came up a few times where I was just devastated after getting off the phone with her at times, but it saved my life. It absolutely saved my life, right? She stressed that I go to home group meetings, to the business meetings. And I started going to these business meetings, partially because it also got me out of the halfway house for a little bit longer, but partially because she told me to. And I got my first service position was cleaning out ashtrays and making coffee before the meeting. And that was some of the best AA service that I could do, right? Because I would make coffee halfway through the meeting, which was great because I couldn't sit still for an entire meeting when I first got sober. I was incapable of doing that, right? And so I was able to make coffee again halfway through the meeting, and then clean up afterwards. And I had no idea what was going on in these business meetings when I first went, right? I just knew there was some guy named Robert and he had a lot of rules for what was going on. And everybody wanted to follow them. And I had no idea really that about the service structure of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And so I started getting involved. I started listening in business meetings and started participating in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I started getting that sense of belonging that it talks about, right? And so I stayed down in Louisiana for about 6.5, 7 months. At that point, I came back home to Nashville, finished up high school at a sober high school that was here at the time. And again, I wish I could tell you that like I came back from that experience in Louisiana as like the poster child for how to be sober. That was not necessarily, again, my experience. It was spirituality was not the top of my mind at 16 years old at this point. And so when I got back from that halfway house, the first week I got a boyfriend and the second week I got a sponsor, so priorities. What I can say though is that the boyfriend lasted for like less than a month and the sponsor lasted for like the next 7 years. So, potato. And again, the sponsor that I had at that point, she was very much into the recovery part of the program, right? And she didn't necessarily stress a lot of service, which there's no shade, right? No shade. But I quit going to business meetings because I didn't think that I had to anymore, right? And I started going to meetings and I was still praying and meditating and kind of doing all of this really, cool recovery stuff. But wasn't really getting involved in service. And this strange shift started to happen kind of slowly, right? Like I started going to meetings to look cool in Alcoholics Anonymous, which is hysterical because if you think about it, we're an anonymous program, right? And here I am like trying to look super cool in an anonymous program, right? Didn't think that one through. So, but what I mean by that is that I would go to the meetings that I thought that all my friends would be at or that all the cool kids would be at. I would make sure that I was like wearing the right clothes, that my hair was done the right way, those sorts of things for Alcoholics Anonymous. And I love AA, I do, right? But, and what I didn't realize was that I was kind of slowly shutting myself off from those about me, right? And I remember I met this guy when I had about 3 years sober, and we started dating and we later ended up getting married and having 2 children, spoiler alert, but he was like super cute, right? Still is. And and I started dating him and he was talking about going to his home group's business meeting. And I was like, that is so cute that you still do that. That's adorable, like good for you for doing that for you. I remember when I had to do that. And he asked me one night if I would go to his home group's business meeting before the meeting, because we normally went to the meeting together and we normally went out to eat afterwards, right? And I was like, well, it just makes sense that we just take one car, right? Like that makes the most sense. So sure, I'll go to this home group business meeting with you. So I go in. And there's about 4 other people in the meeting, and they're looking for a treasurer. And so I do what every good alcoholic does, which is I immediately avoid all eye contact with anyone in the room, and start staring at the ceiling and counting the ceiling tiles and all of that, right? And so, of course, I walked out of that business meeting with a Ziploc bag full of money and coins. And I was my group's treasurer at that point. And I started going back to the next business meeting and kept coming back, right? Became the alternate GSR, and then was able to rotate in as GSR at the next election cycle. And I fell in love with general service, right? That's what happened. I fell in love with general service. And when I say that, I mean, like, the traditions and the concepts are like my love language. Okay. Like, I just like love traditions and concepts so much. I started going to business meetings at my district, my home group at the district level. And then I started going to the area assembly as well, which was like super intimidating, right? Like, I said that at the time. It's great now. That's my family, right? That's my family. And I started learning about the structure of Alcoholics Anonymous and how to participate in Alcoholics Anonymous, and how I participated was through my home group, right? And through that GSR as being that vital link between my group and AA as a whole, because AA is so much bigger than me, right? Like, so much bigger than me. But I'm so selfish sometimes. It's difficult for me to see that. And so, and I also like love a good business meeting when there's like tons of drama, right? Like, get the popcorn out, it's so great. I love when we argue over $3 for 45 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, I love that we do that. I love it because I don't think twice about like paying $3 for a pack of gum as I'm waiting, like as I'm waiting at the grocery store checkout. Don't think twice about that, but because that's my money, right? But when it comes to AA's money, I'm very concerned about how we spend that, right? I'm very concerned about that. So I started getting involved in general service, and I got involved at the area level. I served as our area chairperson a few years back, and then rotated in as alternate delegate. And this is my first year as sitting delegate for our area, which is insane to me. It's absolutely insane to me, right? First of all, that you guys trust me. And like, if I'm the most qualified candidate, we are in trouble, but I'm so grateful to serve this fellowship in so many ways. I'm very passionate about making sure that AA continues to stay relevant, and is there for my children should they need it, or their children should they need it, right? As well as your children and grandchildren and great grandchildren and so forth, right? Like, I want AA to be there for them. What I will say is I don't know that AA has to look the exact same throughout the years, right? And what I mean by that is I love one of the great things that we embraced during this pandemic, right, was this all of a sudden this love for technology that we had been super afraid of as a fellowship for many years, right? So to sit here and think that we've come so far in creating fun and exciting ways to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous is amazing, right? And I'm so excited to see what we do next, right? Like, what's the next cool thing that AA is going to do to reach more and more alcoholics? I'm excited for that. And I had a spiritual experience at the General Service Conference this past year, right? And I know there's a couple other delegates on the call. I've seen them. So, hey guys, and what I can tell you is that whoever your delegate is, they did a wonderful job this year. They did a wonderful job. You can quote me on that, right? I was there. We all participated. It was the most beautiful thing that I have been a part of, right? Every single delegate got up to the microphone at least once, some more than that, right? Some a lot more, but everyone got up and participated. And it was such a beautiful experience to see how big Alcoholics Anonymous actually is, right? Not just at my area level, but to think about the provinces in Canada that are French speaking, and we had translators there. And then we also had, our friends from Puerto Rico, and it was truly a spiritual experience. And so I hope that I can convey that God was absolutely in those rooms that entire week, right? God was in those rooms. I felt it. I was there. I saw, I felt, I believed, right? And be proud of your delegates. Be very proud of your delegates. So, so that's kind of what life is like now for a good part of it, right? This last little bit, I love talking about my relationship with God. I talk a lot about service, I think, in a lot of times when I get asked to speak, because I love it so much, right? But I also really love talking about God too, right? Because I can't. really show up in this service realm if I'm just hiding in service. I have to, for me, I have to apply the principles that I learned in the steps as well. These spiritual principles, I have to kind of inject those into business meetings sometimes, which can be tricky, right? So yeah, I got to AA as with a conception of God that was not keeping me sober. I had a really hard time trying to figure out a new conception to stay sober with, right? And I love how it talks about in our literature that we essentially seek to find a God that works under all conditions, right? And that's what I tried to do. I tried to find this conception of God that worked under all conditions. What I can tell you is how my relationship has changed kind of throughout the time I've been sober, right? I started, and then again, I would love to tell you, I started praying and building this relationship because it was the right thing to do, right? Because morally, I felt obligated to build this relationship with God. No, I started praying because my counselor in rehab told me that I had to start praying. And I said, well, that's dumb. It's not going to work. And she said, yes, it will. Just try it. And I tried it and it worked. Right. But I did it completely out of spite, right? And what I can say is that kind of throughout my sobriety, God has showed up. God has absolutely showed up. And when I had about 7 or 8 years sober, I had a bunch of things that kind of happened, life stuff that happened in the span of about a year and a half, right? And so I got back from ICYPA, the International Conference of Young People in AA in Atlanta in 2009. And then that next week, my mom asked if I would take her to a doctor's appointment. She needed a biopsy, right? She had a mammogram. They found something, and she needed a ride. And at this point, I built up this relationship with her, and she asked me to go with her, and I said absolutely. And so I take her to this biopsy and start praying in the waiting room, right? Like, because it hits me like, oh, she could have cancer, right? That could be a possibility at this point. And I started praying like, God, just don't let her have cancer. Don't let her have cancer. Don't let her have cancer. Right. I picked her up. I took her home and stayed with her for a bit. The next day I woke up and I just said, God, you know what my will is, right? But like whatever your will is too, and the third day I woke up and I said, God, please just help me to accept whatever the results are. And we got a phone call that afternoon that her results came back and she had breast cancer, and they caught it in its early stages. And so she was just going to have to do, an outpatient surgery. So my two sisters come into town at that point, and we take her to this surgery and bring her home. And something just wasn't right, something just wasn't right. And she, we ended up taking her back to the ER a few hours after that. And she ended up having emergency surgery because she had developed an internal bleed. And so they repaired that. And she stayed in the hospital for a few days after that. Right. And it was super scary. It was a super scary time. But what I can tell you is that, I drove us to the hospital, right? I was driving, my mom was in the passenger seat and my two sisters were in the back. And I remember stopping at this stoplight right next to the hospital. And I just took a big deep breath and this voice came out of my mouth, right? I wish I could take credit for it because it sounded really good, right? But what it said was, do you guys want to pray about this? And they said, yeah. And so I'm sitting there waiting for the two good Catholics in the back seat, right, to start praying. And I just look in the rearview mirror and they are looking at me like, are you going to go? Like, come on, let's go. Right. And so I say the Serenity prayer, right? Like that's what AA has taught me is the Serenity prayer. And I just said, God, please help us to accept whatever happens. Right. And God showed up, right? Like I didn't say that. That's not who I am, left to my own devices, right? But that's what AA taught me, was to be open, right? To pause and allow God into each situation. And so, so after Mom went home, a few weeks after that, we got a phone call from our good friend Marianne, and Marianne had been diagnosed with cancer that was widespread. She had brain tumors at this point in her lungs and in her brains, and the doctors gave her about 6 weeks to live, and she lived for about 6 weeks, and then she passed away, right? I had a great aunt that passed away. My husband's sister passed away at that point as well. Kind of all these things happened within just the span of a few months. And I remember getting really angry with God, right? Getting really angry with God and going, what has happened, right? I've done all these things. And you're handing me all of this, right? And I felt like I couldn't say these things in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I felt like I was doing something wrong if I was saying these things. But what was pointed out to me was that, our literature clearly talks about in the 12 and 12, and this is like the only pages of the 12 and 12 that I can quote to you. It's because I had to go to them so often, right? But on 104 and 105 of the 12 and 12, it talks about that we're going to go through times where it's going to take, so much energy just to pray, right? But whenever we kind of get over that, let's go ahead and start doing the things that we know are good for us, right? And that's essentially what happened. I remember my relationship with God looked like, my prayers kind of looked like, God, I know that you're the solution to all of this, but I'm not really interested in having anything to do with you right now. I have nothing to say to you at all, but I know you're the solution to all of this. I'm just not ready to talk to you yet. And I would go to my business meetings because you guys wouldn't leave me alone if I didn't, right? And I would have to make amends for my behavior in the business meeting prior to that, and then leave that business meeting knowing I was going to have to make an amends again for my behavior that evening, right? And you guys didn't care, right? You didn't care. You welcomed me back every time. So thank you for that. Thank you for your patience. I'm a slow learner. So a few months after that, right, my grandfather was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and I was just over it with God, right? I was just over it. And he didn't want to do much treatment for it at all. And so he didn't, right? And towards the end, he needed someone with him kind of 24/7. And I was able to show up in that capacity, right? And stay with him even when he would wake up in the middle of the night and want to rearrange his entire office. And I'd be like, we're not doing that, it's 3 a.m. We're not doing that, but we would talk a lot about God. We would talk a lot about spirituality, and we would talk about what happened in the afterlife, right? And I can vividly recall that we had a conversation at one point, and I just said, God, can you just like show me that you're okay when you pass away? Like, is there something that you can do to let me know that you're okay? And he said, well, I don't really know the rules, Shannon, but what are you thinking? Like, what are you wanting? And I said, I don't know. Just like, give me a sign, like just bring me a single yellow rose. And I know that you'll be okay if I get a single yellow rose. And he said, well, I'll talk with the big man and I'll see what strings I can pull. And I said, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And so, a couple months after that, right, is when he drew his last breath, and he was surrounded by friends and family. I was able to help him write a thank you card to his home group that he had helped start so many years ago, right? And be able to deliver it to them, right? Do the things that I said I was going to do, fulfill those promises, which is not how I am left to my own devices, right? So he passed away, and I can remember that AA showed up, man, like not only his home group, but my home group showed up, right? And I can remember our family going, who are all these people? Who are all these people? And it was you, right? You guys showed up. You showed up. And I was so grateful for that. And I can remember, a few months after that, my husband's grandfather passed away as well, and we weren't married yet, and so I couldn't get off work to go to the funeral, and I was, kind of upset about that as well, right? And so I got off work. I was working in the hospital for 12-hour shifts at the time, and I came home that night after he had come back, and I came around and sat on the couch, and he put his head in my lap, and he was telling me about the funeral. And he's kind of sad, and I look over at the table that's next to us, and And I see this little boutonniere of a single yellow rose, right? And I said, Philip, where did this come from? And he said, this was from my grandfather's funeral. I meant to put it in water and give it to you, but I knew you couldn't make it. And I wanted you to know that we were all thinking about you, and I wanted you to have it. And I knew at that moment, right, that like God was so much bigger than anything that I could have ever imagined, right? I knew that he later told me that the yellow rose was the only flower that his grandfather wanted, and so his casket was covered in yellow roses. And I think it's adorable, right? Because I put God in these like very defined, like 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional shapes of how he can fix, I tell God how he can fix my life. And God's like, that's adorable. I am so much bigger than that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just going to rock your socks off. That's it. We're not even playing the same game. Like, your mind can't even comprehend, right? Your tiny little mind can't comprehend the things that I'm capable of. And I love that. Right. And I love that because I knew at that moment that God's got it. Right. Like, I don't have to worry about anything. I don't. God's got it. God's got me in this life. He's got me in the next. Right. Like, whatever happens, I'm fine. You're fine. We are all okay. God's got it. I just have to remember my role in that process, right? I'm not the bus driver. I'm just a passenger on the bus. That's it. And I love that, right? I love that because in 2019, right, I'm working alongside with my mom at the hospital. We were both doing research nursing at the time, and we used to have the same office, but they had to separate us, right? And so, so that we would get work done. So my sister calls me though, and she says, I need you to go check on mom if something's not right. And so I said, what are you talking about? I just saw her, she's fine. And she's like, you need to go check on her, something's not right. And so I go over to the next office, and I go, hey mom, how's it going? And her coworker just said, you got to take her to the ER. Something's not right. She doesn't know how to turn on her computer. She doesn't know how to answer the phone. Something's going on, and I don't know what's going on, but she needs to go to the ER. And so I said, Mom, you ready to go? And she said, yeah. We walk over across the street to the emergency room from where we were, and they did a scan, and they found a tumor in her brain, and they found a really aggressive tumor that has about there was a 12% chance with full treatment of surgery, chemo, and radiation that she would live for a year. But where hers was, it wasn't able to be operated on. And so I was able to show up as a daughter for her, right? And able to show up for my stepdad and for my sisters, and I wanted to not show up to AA, right? But at the time I was serving as alternate delegate, and you guys wouldn't allow that. Or excuse me, I was serving as chairperson, and you guys wouldn't allow that, right? You guys kept calling me, and you kept me in the center of the boat, even when I didn't want to be in the center of the boat sometimes, right? But I was able to show up for her and to show up for my family. And when she passed, right? When she passed, it was I felt God in that moment too, right? I miss her horribly every day, right? But I know that God's got it. I know that God's got her, and I know that she's fine, and I know that we're going to be fine, right? I say all that. I'm still, going to get out on the road tomorrow and like have some choice words for the person that cuts me off. I'm sure of it, right? But I know big picture, right? Like God's got it, and I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for that. And at her funeral, you guys showed up again too, right? You showed up again too. And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that you guys showed up. If you ever have the opportunity just to show up and suit up, right? Like, please do it. Please do it. Right. So yeah, so I know I like to close with something that my grandfather used to always tell me, and and this is what he would tell his home group too, because we're in the South. He would just say, if no one's told you this today, I want you to know that God is hog ass wild about you. So so thank you so much for allowing me to share. Thank you so much, Phil. Appreciate it. Take care.